Welcome to the Veritas Podcast. I'm Scott Veritas here with my co-host Ben Rebellis, and we're going to talk about Kanye West today because we kind of have to. I don't always go with the most sensational story to discuss on the show, but this is kind of front page news everywhere. It's hard not to talk about the fact that we are seeing probably the worst public mental health crisis in a generation or two, in terms of A-list celebrities at least. Kanye, if you don't know, and I'm sure that you do if you're watching the show, but if you don't, just to bring people up to speed really quickly, he went on to Tim Pool's show a couple weeks ago. Tim Pool very, very gently, as nicely as he could, kind of pushed back on some of the anti-Semitic stuff that Kanye's been on. And Kanye responded by walking off the show. This was after maybe 6 or 7 minutes, didn't make it very far on Timcast. He also appears to be running for president, and so he brought his two chief campaign advisors, Milo Yiannopoulos and Nick Fuentes, with him to the Timcast, so they were there as well. He did not bring Milo Yiannopoulos, interestingly enough, to his next media engagement, which was Alex Jones's show. I think InfoWars is the name of the network. I can't remember the name of the show, but Alex Jones's show on InfoWars. Kanye did an interview there, which was significantly worse because Alex Jones actually allowed him to speak for several hours. Although, to be fair to Tim Pool, Tim tried to allow him to speak. He actually walked off of Tim's show. But he brought Nick Fuentes with him. And the main highlights are that Kanye presented a sort of bipolar, schizophrenic, anti-Semitic, conspiratorial front that is pretty beyond the pale. We're talking stuff that is not outside of the Overton window, as in like the last 10 years Overton window. We're talking about stuff that has not been acceptable for a public figure to say in about 50 or 60 years, about Jewish people, about Hitler, about Nazis. He repeatedly interrupted Alex Jones to say that he likes Hitler a lot and thinks that Hitler had a lot of great ideas. And he lamented the fact that we don't get to discuss that more often. He went after Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. He also presented a small fishing net and a Yoo-hoo drink as a prop in doing so, because net and Yahoo, which, by the way, if he was a comedian, which would be kind of a funny prop bit. But the fact that he also wore, I think, some kind of black hood. Or not a hood, it was a full face mask.
Full mask that had like zippers for eyes that he kept zipped up the whole time.
Almost like a GIMP mask.
Yeah.
We don't know what's going on with Kanye. I mean, we sort of do. He's very deeply mentally ill. Most of you probably already know the stuff I'm talking about. Most of you, if you're on Twitter, if you're on social media, you've seen what happened. Kanye is a deeply unwell person, and he is pretty undeniably also anti-Semitic, considering the fact that he was repeatedly coming to the defense of Nazis and Hitler during his interview with Alex Jones. I mean, that's pretty much the end of the arc of some people still trying to publicly defend Kanye at this point. It would seem that, I mean, he certainly seems to have scared the bejesus out of Trump and every establishment Republican in existence. Whether or not he even should have been coded as a right-winger conservative person to begin with is something I want to jump into in a second. But Ben, I do want to give you an opportunity. There's so much here before I even get to any like specific discussion questions for us. Is there anything you want to just say off the bat about, because I know, and to give credit to Ben here, Ben has watched a significant portion of the interview. I've only watched the highlights. Ben, you've been suffering through a lot more of this than I have. What are your thoughts just generally on what's going on with Kanye West right now?
Yeah, so I do have a couple of prefaces. First, Scott, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that this is our 10th episode together, the 10th episode that we've done the Veritas podcast. So I got myself a little cheers for you and I on that point.
Hey.
And then I will turn around and be really mad at you that I had to type Infowars.com into my browser. And now Google knows that I've watched that video I think I watched about an hour of it, and it goes for about 3 hours.
It's not just Google that knows.
Yeah.
There's a lot of institutions. You're on a lot of lists now, my friend.
I'm on a list. This podcast has put me on so many lists. It was jaw-dropping in how just crazy it was. Like, I got to this point where I was almost desensitized. Like, I had it on one monitor while I'm doing notes, doing work on another. And every time I came over, it was another moment when I was like, that can't be real, right? Like, I literally, because he was wearing this full face mask, I went and tried to find some type of source to say that this wasn't actually Kanye West, and I found zero efforts to disconfirm that this was Kanye West. Like, this interview is so unhinged, and honestly, at this point, like, Alex Jones is not the most responsible journalist. I'm air quote there. But I mean, I honestly think he should have put this to a stop, because this was the rantings of a crazy person.
I mean, it's like being a ref in a boxing match. It's like, but
Yeah.
it's Kanye versus Kanye. It's just him beating the shit out of himself. I mean, the man has lost something like $2.5 billion in wealth. And look, he's still a very wealthy man. I know he's
Yeah.
still worth several hundreds of millions of dollars, but he has, by percentage, he's lost like something like 70% of his wealth in the last couple of months, just because
And
he's
he's
losing
lost
all
his
these
entire
endorsements.
family.
His entire family. I mean, that had precipitated kind of a little bit before the anti-Semitism stuff got way out of control, because he's been mentally ill for a while. He's been,
Right.
I mean, he said that slavery was a choice. You know, he said all sorts of unusual things. This is its peak for sure. It's gotten worse, and I don't think this ends well. And I do want to talk about kind of the end game here for society. How do how do we deal with the fact that an a sort of A-tier public figure, an A-list public figure, is completely lost in anti-Jewish cabal conspiracies. But I do want to take one moment to just say that, I said a few weeks ago that Kanye West was a distraction and should not be taken seriously by conservatives, even though it is tempting to look at. I guess I'll preface this by saying this gets into something I wanted to kind of talk about with this story. Is it feels like for a while now, conservatives have really latched onto celebrities that support them, because there aren't very many. And particularly, they've latched onto black celebrities that support them, or almost any black public figure that supports them. And I understand it, because conservatives are starved for, the right wing is sort of starved for support, particularly from anyone who is a minority in Hollywood, really Hollywood generally, but especially black people in Hollywood. So when you get somebody who is a black celebrity that is espousing vaguely conservative views, or I think it was around 2018, Kanye said he supported Trump, it is tempting to latch onto that. And I pretty much from the jump, and I think a few people were smart enough to say, don't do this. Like, don't latch on to Kanye West as somebody who can blow the door open for black conservatism in this country. Because yes, it is true that Republicans do historically terribly with black voters, particularly black women. It's the closest thing to a sort of monolith in demographic voting is black women. I think they vote something like 96 or 97% Democrat. And so it's tempting for Republicans to want to make inroads by having more black public figures on their side. Kanye was always clearly a terrible, terrible choice for that. He has, I mean, at one point, people were very excited for him to do his Rogan interview a couple of years ago, his much postponed and much anticipated Rogan interview. It was completely incoherent. And I remember pointing this out to a lot of people, that the thing had like 30 million views, had a ton of views. And I didn't understand how anyone was watching it. It was completely incoherent, even at the time. This was, I think, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And Kanye, he never really showed the ability to actually analyze issues or provide valuable insights, even if some of the things he was saying were vaguely conservative in nature, particularly supporting a Republican candidate for president. I think this should be a cautionary tale to right wingers and conservatives, folks in this sort of anti-woke coalition, that you have to be a little selective with the people that you look to as leaders in your movement. And to be fair, not a ton of establishment mainstream figures in the Republican Party were looking to Kanye. It's not like Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson were saying, "Oh, Kanye West is the future of the Republican Party." Nobody said that. But there was an undercurrent that something exciting was happening when he initially started to get more sort of right wing in his rhetoric. And I do feel vindicated insofar that I always was saying, whether it was on this show or elsewhere, this is not going to end well. I said that this would happen with Kanye.
Yeah. So I think I have a broad and a specific point on this, but this this is the danger of playing the woke game. Their game is to say that only black people can talk about the black lived experience. And if you buy that premise, you go out seeking and aggrandizing whatever black person may hold some conservative values. The problem is not finding Black people that have conservative values. The problem is finding Black people that have those values that are willing to express them publicly as a face, which means you're going to confront about 3 different groups of people. You might find a legitimate conservative, you might find huckster contrarian conservatives, or you'll find truly crazy people. Which, by the way, if we're going to talk about completely dishonest huckster operators, is there any bigger example than Milo Yiannopoulos, who appeared on these shows? I mean, what a fucking troll. But still, so if we want to, if the conservatives are going to take some token group and find a person that'll support their positions that facially they're not supposed to support, there's always this risk of entertaining people who are not legitimately of the cause, whether that because of fraudster motives, which is what Nick Fuentes and Yiannopoulos are. And then to the more specific point, talking about Kanye, and I'm going to steal from Camille Foster from the fifth column. Republicans, conservatives should have always known he was an unreliable ally. This is a person who is mentally unwell. And then at some point during his unwellness, he came up for air and said, I want to wear a MAGA hat. And then the Republicans were so craving the cultural power that the left already has over the culture and popular culture. They're like, ooh, we'll take this one. Yeah, that's not going to work out well because he's an obviously unreliable ally.
Yeah. And the most understandable part of that is that Kanye is an S tier celebrity. He absolutely is. This is not, we're not talking about Kelsey Grammer or John Voight, who are also, conservative celebrities. We're talking about an S tier, like like arguably one of the 5 most famous entertainers on the planet, a top 3 person in the entertainment industry, and really number 1 for Black entertainers, at least that I can think of, certainly in music. And so it really did seem like this opportunity to get that kind of support with younger people. Kanye is iconic to pretty much everyone from like younger Gen X folks to everyone through the millennials and Gen Z. I think he himself is probably Gen X based on the timeline of when he did his work. Yeah, about kind of in the Gen X realm. But, I do understand the temptation a little bit, but yeah, it was clear from the jump. I mean, because he's always been strange. I mean, you go back to 2009, he jumped on stage at the MTV Music Video Awards to say like, Taylor Swift can't accept this award. It has to go to Beyonce.
I'm going to let you finish.
Yeah. And he did, of course. And he was infamously, admonished by Barack Obama, who, as I recall, rarely cursed in interviews, but called Kanye a jackass. So I think it's interesting what you said about the kind of people that you're going to end up falling for if you do sort of desperately grope out into the void for something to latch onto when it comes to celebrity support, or specifically minority celebrities, or people who at least can appeal to a certain demographic. You mentioned contrarian conservatives who don't seem to have the best of motives. I don't know if you were trying to say Candace Owens, but I'm more than happy
I wasn't not saying that.
I'm more than happy to call out Candace. All of these people that we talk about are welcome to come onto the show and hash these things out if they want to, but Candace has always come off as somebody that if you're a decent enough judge of character, and actually, to be fair, and I know there are people in the audience who like Trump, but I've always said this about Trump as well. If you're a good judge of character, you can tell when people just they may agree with you on a lot of things. And I do agree with Candace Owens on a lot of things. A lot of things she says are just objectively true, but then a lot of things she says are not true, or they're framed poorly. Or, there was at one point, I think she said something about like, she supports free speech, but flag burning should be illegal.
Yeah.
And it's just things that are incoherent and don't seem all that genuinely conservative. So this brings me to the point of like something I did want to talk about, which is I don't think it's a bad thing if you had, you mentioned this was a possibility, a legitimate option when you were looking at people who could blow the door open for Black conservatism in this country. It's just very hard to see who that person could be. Thomas Sowell is great, but he's old. He's like 95. So he's way too old. Thomas Sowell is a great public intellectual, but he doesn't, really have that kind of broad appeal. He's a much more sort of like deep intellectual figure.
He's an economist. It's not the biggest appeal.
Yeah, it's not the sexiest. Yeah. And he is great, by the way. Everyone should check out the work of Thomas Sowell. But Candace Owens, Kanye West, kind of these hucksters or crazy people. I think of Larry Elder as somebody that I actually really liked for a while. He definitely got pretty hard on the Trump train, and then he seems to discredit himself even more when he ran for governor of California, and basically said that there like shouldn't be a minimum wage, which I know a lot of people actually believe on the right, but when you're running for governor of California, that maybe isn't the smartest thing. It's just not the most pragmatic position to hold. And he got, bitch slapped by Gavin Newsom in that election, despite the fact that people were legitimately furious with Newsom for, hanging out at the French Laundry when he was telling everyone else to stay at home during COVID. So, Larry Elder might be the closest thing to, I mean, he had a great moment with Dave Rubin years ago. That's kind of an iconic moment for the intellectual dark web. I think Larry Elder is one of the closest people to someone who is like a legitimate leader for Black conservatism in the country. I mean, I don't know. I think there's Ben Carson, who is just mostly incoherent and just not particularly articulate. Clearly a smart guy. He's a neurosurgeon, but never been the best speaker, as became apparent when he ran for president almost 7 years ago now. But it's just it sucks. I don't know. I guess I don't hate the idea that there would be somebody to try and effectively reach out to Black Americans, especially younger Black Americans who are incredibly left-leaning. Because it is not good for Republicans to have an overwhelmingly white base, although they have been doing pretty well with Latinos lately as well, which has been an interesting story. But man, does it seem like the bench there is really thin. It's really thin. And it stands to reason mathematically. If 95% of Black people are Democratic, your bench is going to be thin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if the question is, do we need that Black conservative figurehead? Of course, I wish we didn't. I mean, in my opinion, I want to abolish this whole concept of race. And even if we recognize it, I want race to be less important than how long my second toe on my foot is. Some people are shorter, long, whatever. But if we put aside my idealism, I'm not sure how necessary that it is to have this Black conservative as a figurehead. I agree that probably most of the younger Black population, it leans Democratic. But if you also look at a lot of stories that come out of urban neighborhoods that are infested with crime and are overwhelmingly Black, you get these reports of people wanting more policing. You get these people who are wanting to instill these values. And I wonder how much the anti-racist movement has caused a backlash in those communities and are spinning them a little more red. Maybe not enough to pull that lever, but I do wonder how that dynamic is playing out based on reports of rising crimes in some of those areas. But it would be nice to have those figureheads, and some do already exist. You have people like Glenn Loury, John McWhorter, Camille Foster, Thomas Chatterton Williams. We talked about Tom Sowell and Chloe Valdery. They're not all conservatives, but they all are pushing against...
Coleman Hughes.
Coleman Hughes is a great example. Yeah. Pushing back. And Coleman Hughes is not only Black.
Very young.
He's
younger than me,
he's 26 years old.
Yeah.
He's a rapper. He's a musician. Like he's kind of a cool guy. Like if you watch his music videos, they're pretty cool. But all of those people at least are pushing back. While they may not all be conservative, they're all pushing back against this notion that race should be some blueprint for how you exist in and perceive the world. And that's the world I would want to see become. And hopefully that's the direction conservatives, libertarians, however we want to put it, that's the direction we're pushing, because that's the world that I think we all want to live in.
Yeah, I think that was great. I mean, I think the examples that you gave, it is true that you have Black intellectuals who at least exist outside of the sort of woke sphere. Mm-hmm. And these people are very effective at sort of communicating what they communicate. I guess I don't want to reduce them to just being, Black intellectuals. They are also just really good intellectuals, especially I like Coleman a lot. Yeah. And I've wanted to talk to him for a while, but the fact that he's as young as he is really impressive. I want to say he's like 25, 26 years old. You should all check out, Coleman has a podcast. I forget what it's called, but everyone listening
Conversations
to this
with Coleman.
Yeah. Conversations with Coleman. Coleman Hughes is fantastic. Really hope to maybe get an interview with him someday. He's fantastic. But it's just, I guess it's all is a shame insofar that like none of these people can do what Kanye could have done. Like there is a missed opportunity in there somewhere. Like I'll say it this way. Like, it's someone we haven't said anything about, and it's because he obviously was never going to be conservative, but he did have, I'd say, a better opportunity than anyone, black or white or any race, to push back against wokeness in its early stages? Barack Obama. Barack Obama was the one person that, when it's sort of like, I guess what I'm getting at here, because Barack Obama, this is getting really deeper than race. This is, in his case, it's really about his political affiliation, being the leader of the Democratic Party for so long. There are people that have a certain amount of credibility with people that need to be reached with the message that wokeness is a problem. Or that, certain issues are being presented in a misleading way by the media. And by the way, I think Elon Musk is actually doing a decent job, and that's something that we might talk about, in the coming weeks, of sort of letting people know about that sort of stuff that maybe wouldn't otherwise know about it. But Obama is a really interesting figure when you're talking about somebody who has credibility with a demographic that won't listen to really anyone else. Obama really has nothing to do with his race. In the early stages of wokeness, I'm talking like 2014 to, let's say, 2019, in the sort of early stages of what we now call wokeness, I always wanted, and this was sort of the Dave Rubin school of thought for a while, and I sort of came from that world because he was one of my intro points for the IDW. I always wanted there to be a very influential left-wing figure who could go out there and say, like, hey, people on the left, you shouldn't be supporting this either. Like this, like, you can't just associate everything that isn't woke with Trump and then run away screaming from it. Dave Rubin, to his credit, tried desperately to do that, but he didn't have the clout. At the end of the day, he was sort of a backbench host from the Young Turks. He wasn't nearly as influential as a Barack Obama was. And, Sam Harris tried to do this as well from the left. This was kind of the whole idea of the IDW. Brett Weinstein, you had these sort of, Sam Harris was probably the highest up. He was almost like a B-list celebrity.
Right.
But you had all these people trying to say, like, hey, look, we're on the left and we're telling you this is bad. Like this, like the left needs to wake up. Now, by 2020, it became evident that had failed miserably. That effort did not succeed. Really, in the 2019 part of the Democratic primaries, it became evident because all of those candidates went pretty damn woke.
Those debates were woke.
Yeah, it was like, do you support third trimester abortions? And like everyone but Tulsi Gabbard raises their hand. And it's like, do you support making illegal border crossings, a civil citation, get a fucking traffic ticket for breaking into the country, And so it became evident that had failed. I say all of this to preface my point that there was always one person who, if anyone could have put a stop to the left descending into woke madness, could have been Barack Obama.
Yeah.
And he did, as I recall, I think it was 2019, he very mildly pushed back on cancel culture and wokeness a little bit. He gave an interview where he said, like, oh, the young people, they're, kind of obnoxious and they need to chill out a little bit. But he never emphatically, went any further than that. And I think that was such a missed opportunity. He was top of the list in terms of people who had the credibility with a demographic. And I'm just talking about people who lean to the left politically, not even necessarily like black people or whatever. But he had all that credibility that he could have used, I think, really effectively. And he doesn't have it as much anymore. He's sort of been, there's some historical revisionism of him being like actually a somewhat moderate or even conservative Democratic president at this point. Because he, threw a couple drones at people, as I recall. And he also enforced immigration laws. He actually believed that this country had borders and he would deport an awful lot of people. So, there are people on the left who think that
he's where kids in cages started, right?
Kids in cage. And then also he didn't support same-sex marriage until his second term, or close to his second term, right before his second term.
Which I actually think is an illustrative point here, Scott, is Barack Obama was a politician. He was not in favor of gay marriage until it was time for it to be in favor of it. He was willing to allow the woke cancel culture to come around until after he was out of office, 3 years after he was out of office, and then spoke again, as you said, mildly, that people shouldn't be freaking out at every little thing. Like, that's not a strong position, and he's not a person who he just didn't have those strong positions because he was a politician who wanted to keep getting elected. I agree, but don't get me wrong. I agree with you. If anybody had that clout, at least that perceived clout and power, you're right. It was him. But for him, he's just a politician.
Yeah. I mean, also I think of, yeah, it's true that, I mean, he just failed that test utterly. I mean, he also, I always say Barack Obama didn't do a lot to stop wokeness, but he also didn't do too much to fuel it. Yeah. I don't actually hold, I think Ben Shapiro also often tries to kind of hold Barack Obama at least partially responsible for the rise of wokeness. I don't think Obama was a particularly key figure in it one way or another. The one thing he did do was he did not handle the Ferguson and Florida with Trayvon Martin. You know,
Yeah,
he didn't handle the early days of Black Lives Matter particularly well.
that's right.
But other than that, he didn't really do a whole lot to fuel it. But I think of Bernie Sanders is another example of somebody who, actually, Bernie, you could almost argue maybe even more so. Now, Bernie is somebody that you wouldn't think would speak out against wokeness because his economic views are so far to the left.
Right.
But he famously was never all that socially liberal. He's
Right.
always been a socialist with fairly moderate social views. He did not support the legalization of marijuana until he ran for president in 2016. He was fairly supportive of gun rights until he ran for president in 2016. And he also famously did not really engage in a lot of racial or ethnic identity politics and was against unchecked immigration, as many socialists were up until 2016, 2017. And Bernie Sanders, was somebody who, had he kept with some of these trends and actually I do, to Bernie's credit, I do remember him, or you know what? No, it was the opposite. For a second, I was going to say he said during a debate that, white people know what it's like to be poor, but actually it was the opposite. There was a debate where he said, like, white people don't know what it's like to live in a ghetto. And it's like, there's poor white people all over the country.
Yeah.
He sort of failed that test miserably. At one point, I remember these Black Lives Matter activists. This was such a great, like, poetic, like, allegory moment. These Black Lives Matter activists in the early days of Bernie's campaign, when he was the most popular person in the fucking country, it was like the summer of Bernie Sanders. Or the spring of Bernie Sanders, he was giving a speech. And, there are these huge crowds that are coming out. It was like this incredible moment that Bernie was seemingly putting up a real fight against Hillary Clinton. These Black Lives Matter activists jumped up on the stage, took them and tried to take the microphone from him. And he just handed it to them. He handed them the microphone. And it felt like this moment where it was like, the future of the Democratic Party isn't this sort of race blind economic populism. It's this woke, identity politics thing. And it was literally Bernie Sanders passing the microphone, like surrendering the microphone to people forcefully taking it from him. And it felt like he failed a test there where he could have said, like, no, this is my fucking speech. Get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
But of course he didn't want to do that to two black ladies who were jumping on the stage because of the optics. And, all of this is to say that it's just all of these moments where somebody, like, because to bring it back to Kanye did have credibility with the generation and a certain ethnic demographic that a lot of other people don't have, but really not the guy for the job. I do want to ask, because I try to talk about, solutions on this show and not just bitch and moan about things. What do you think, Ben, we, as a society, what the hell do we do about Kanye? Like, what's the protocol for a public meltdown by a very influential celebrity? Because if it was a lesser celebrity, you'd say just ignore it. Like, you'd say, if this was some B-lister, you'd say just let him, whatever. But this is a guy who can convince people to buy like $80 t-shirts. Can he convince people to, grab tiki torches and put on KKK hoods? I don't know. I don't think so, by the way. I'm not going to say on the show today that I'm scared as a Jewish person of what Kanye's doing. I'm not going to be that alarmist. Some people are doing that right now. I'm not that level of, I don't think Kanye can convince people to be anti-Semitic. But what the hell, what do we do? Like, what do we do?
There's not a lot of precedent, especially for someone whose career is in the stage where Kanye's is. I mean, you've got people like, I think Ed Asner went kind of crazy and went into super conspiracy theory land, but that was, again, in the twilight of his career. So I don't know what we do with someone who seemingly is, I mean, and I'm not a huge Kanye fan, I keep up, who seems to be somewhere near the height of his career. Like, if his next album was, like 808s and Heartbreaks, like, that would be incredible. But honestly, I think once his next album comes out, I don't know who's going to listen to it. I mean, I think that there's going to be radio stations that and other general media that probably aren't going to want to play his next album.
I think most radio stations. At this point, I don't think his music will be played on the radio.
So I think Kanye needs to get some help. And it would be, and if he did, see, that's kind of an interesting part, is if he did get some help and came back, I don't know, 5 years from now and made, again, another really incredible album, he may be just fine. But to the points that we specifically care about on this show, conservatives, Republicans, anybody who's leaning that way, you've got to completely detach yourself here. Yeah. Like, hopefully the guy gets some help, but for political purposes, which I hate talking about because it seems so disingenuous, you got to hopefully the guy fades away.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's pretty much happened. I mean, the bare minimum has been that Republicans need to, and to be fair, Republicans don't necessarily deserve to be attached at the hip to this guy. It's not like Mitch McConnell. I mean, I know Trump was kind of buddy buddy with him, but Trump's kind of his own thing.
Right.
But
But we're also hoping he fades away as well.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is, I would argue everything that we're saying needs to be done with Kanye. I argue at this point needs to be done with Trump, who is a 3-cycle loser now. I'll give him the one in 2016, but he's lost 3 election cycles in a row and is not nearly as nuts as Kanye. I'm going to be completely fair to Trump that he's and Trump, for all of his allegedly bigoted statements, many of which are not, by the way, are taken out of context or whatever. But he's never even been accused, I think, of anti-Semitism in particular. He did really. I don't know. Maybe he comes from, the real estate community in New York, and he actually has pretty good relationships with Jewish people. And so he's never, Trump, that isn't on the list of Trump alleged bigotry bingo. He's never really had an issue with the Jews that I know of, at least. He's been accused of being bigoted to pretty much every other group, but, and actually now that I think about it, not so much gays either. Usually it's like ethnic minorities with Trump.
Didn't
like,
he hug a gay flag?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah,
and
he's been supportive of same-sex marriage. Yeah, Trump's again. I'm going to say alleged because I don't necessarily think Trump is like a vile racist. I'm not going to go along with that rhetoric. It definitely. I mean, the one I always point to is when he told Ilhan Omar, he was like, "You should fucking go back to Africa." That was the one where I was like, I don't know how to contextualize that or defend that. But other than that, other than the one time he told a sitting congresswoman to go back to Africa, other than that. Some stuff is like you could frame it in a different, if he's talking about illegal immigration or certainly the stuff at Charlottesville was always taken out of context. I felt like he was just very inarticulate and they tried to make it seem like he was defending Nazis. And I don't think that's necessarily what he was doing. So the whole Trump thing is interesting. But all of this is to say, I do think that I keep saying it on the show and it's going to be something I have to say because he's running for president. So this isn't going to go away for the next couple of years. I think he needs to be kind of cut loose as well. Ben, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of solving the Kanye problem. It's an individual person. He's got to solve his individual problems. Like society can only do so much. Like he's going to be deplatformed. And by the way, I think this is a rare case where, I mean, I'm not one to say that we should be deplatforming people. I know Elon Musk, it was too much for him. I mean, he's been banned from Twitter for posting swastikas.
Yeah, there's apparently a really interesting. So the image he posted, I was just listening to this on a podcast. The image he posted was a swastika within a Star of David, and apparently this is part of a symbol of some ideology called realism that has to do with aliens, and it's a very weird thing. I did not look it up before we got on here, but yes, it's anti-Semitic, it's horrible, it's hateful, all that. But apparently, it's also consistent with this weird alien cult. Yeah,
it's all that and more. It's like, yeah. I mean, look, this gets to an interesting conversation about deplatforming because I pretty much never advocate for someone to be deplatformed. I think there are some very specific instances where you can and should deplatform someone if they are advocating for violence. I think the argument that Musk has made is that the swastika is a symbol of a violent genocidal ideology and that posting it is a threat to Jewish users of Twitter. I think that's borderline. I mean, it's interesting because there's a couple of steps there you have to get to the violence. You're saying this is a symbol of a violent group from history. I guess I can say this because I'm Jewish. Maybe I would get in more trouble if not. But, I'm generally pretty close. I'm not a free speech absolutist, but I'm close to it. And, I'll say this. I think it's totally fair and that it's called for and that it's good that Kanye has lost his endorsements. No one is obligated to sponsor this man or to pay him anything. Him being banned from social media, I'm almost always against people being banned from social media. But Kanye is really testing my principles because he is leading into Nazism, which is a inherently violent ideology. Again, this is an ideology that led to the deaths of many, many people, the systematic extermination of many, many people who share my ethnic heritage. So I think that it's borderline when you get into that area. When you're getting into incitement to violence, I think that is a legitimate reason, obviously, to bring someone off of a platform. But the thing that I definitely advocate for here is not platforming, which is different from deplatforming. I don't necessarily, Whether or not he should be banned from all these platforms
Yeah.
is a question. But I think that Alex Jones needs to be the last person who interviews Kanye West for a while. Nobody needs to talk to him. He's not saying anything of value. He's only hurting himself in the country. I don't think, unless he is ready to go onto a broadcast and actually have a moment where he says like, hey, you know what? I actually took a couple months off. I chilled out a little bit. I am sorry for what I said, and I hope nobody, took it to heart. Unless he's ready to say that at some point in the near future, he needs to just be left to his own to deal with his issues.
Yeah.
Because
I think that's absolutely right. And not only is I think he needs to separate himself from people like Milo Yiannopoulos and Nick Fuentes. Those people are trash people. They're toxic leeches who are looking for fame and money, and they will keep perpetuating. Those will be the people that keep putting him on Alex Jones, that keep putting him out in front of people to bolster their own careers. Those guys know exactly what they're doing, and it's super shameful. Both of them are cowards and should stand up and try to help someone that they say that they think they want to, that they care about, instead of parading him around as someone to get them more money and fame.
Yeah. I mean, you're exactly, I mean, they are just leeches. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, Fuentes is somebody who I've never really had any interest in interacting with. He's always been just kind of this. I don't really understand the appeal of Fuentes. I know he has a small group of people that really like him. To me, he's like, if you took somebody as anti-charismatic as like Ted Cruz and you just added racism, like I don't like, say what you want about Ted Cruz. The guy's not a racist. He's just really hard to listen to and not particularly charismatic. But Nick Fuentes, to me, is a very similar kind of character who just isn't charismatic, isn't easy to listen to, has an annoying voice and affect that I just don't understand. He's also very young. I don't know why so many people take him. I think he's like 24 years old.
Something like that.
And yet, he is fairly, I don't want to say fairly influential, because then it's going to give credence to the people who are thinking that like we're going to have a second Holocaust or something. He's influential in this small corner of the internet that we call, let's say, the far, far, far right. Nick Fuentes is. He is sort of a staple as being like the furthest person to the right on a debate panel in sort of the debate scene, as I understand it. And I don't understand why. I don't know why this guy has an audience. Yiannopoulos I find a little bit more interesting insofar that Milo was a legitimately entertaining figure at the very least in like 2016. He was very entertaining. He is funny. Like, I will say, if he had just become a stand-up comedian or something, I think he could have done a lot of favors for himself. He's a funny guy. He is actually quite charismatic. I want to give that to Milo 100%. Yeah. Very charismatic guy. Very fun to listen to in some contexts. But yes, has obviously fallen off. The reemergence of him here is something I don't want to ignore. He played a big role in my early kind of emergence from my sort of liberal, sleep state when I was a liberal Democrat, because he when he went to UC Berkeley and they set the fucking school on fire, that was a big moment for me. I was like, I don't think you should set the school on fire when Milo Yiannopoulos comes to town. But I guess the one thing I would say about Milo in his defense is he's obviously had a decline in terms of how interesting he is as a public figure and as a provocateur. I mean, he's sort of languished in obscurity for a while and has reemerged to sort of leech onto Kanye West and manage his presidential campaign. Campaign manager Milo Yiannopoulos. But the thing that I will say in his events is he did definitely go through a pretty fucking brutal cancellation, even by the standards of most cancellations. Milo was one of the first ones. He was even before, I think, James Damore. I mean, Milo was like, it was February of 2017 that these clips of him drunkenly saying kind of pseudo pedo-y things on Joe Rogan came out. And, he lost a lot. I mean, he went from kind of the top of the, I sort of call it like almost like the proto IDW, like something that kind of existed before the IDW that was a loose connection of sort of anti social justice figures. And he went from that to just being a fucking nobody. I mean, he got fired from Breitbart. I mean, it was his book deal was canceled. I mean, so I think that probably hurt him mentally. I think he's clearly suffered mentally from that and declined significantly in his ability to he got banned from most social media platforms. I remember he hung around on YouTube for a while. That was the one where he was able to stick around for a while, but they eventually banned him too. But yeah, he over time became increasingly insane in his views. I mean, he actually wasn't always quite as crazy into the anti-Semitic stuff. 'Cause I think he is half Jewish, by the way, which is very odd.
He says that that is attempted to be confirmed, but I'm not sure if anyone had. I don't know if anyone's proved or disproved that. I mean, I'll actually concur with you a little bit here, Scott. I remember the first time I saw Milo Yiannopoulos was on Dave Rubin, and he was there trolling the left. And, as someone who's pretty anti-left, I got a little bit of that one-hit wonder, come on, Eileen joy of seeing a gay dude come back against the left of which he was supposed to be a part. But, I think you're exactly right when you said if he had just been a comedian, if he had straightforwardly said he was a performer, I would have so much more respect for him. But he presented himself as an intellectual when in reality he was an actor. And we know that now because now he's apparently Christian and not gay.
Not gay.
Not
Milo Yiannopoulos is very straight.
Yeah,
obviously.
Because you see him wearing sunglasses and a suit and with blue pants inside next to Nick Fuentes wearing a blue hoodie. Like, I know which guy's the straight guy here.
Yeah, I mean, Milo is. Milo makes me a little sad, to be honest. Like Milo, it makes me a little sad because, as we both kind of said, I think that if he had just leaned into being a comedian and really stuck to what I do think is a strong suit for him, which is being kind of a funny, charismatic guy, which he definitely was at one point.
Yeah.
I always think of it as like, what if George W. Bush had just been the commissioner of baseball? He would be a beloved public figure to this day. No Iraq war. There's just, it's like one of these things where it's an alternate timeline. But at the end of the day, we have to talk about Milo for who he is, not who he could have been. And he's become a pretty brutal, as I understand, he's become anti-Semitic. I mean, he's been talking about the Jewish problem and all that, and he's leeching onto Kanye. And all of this is to say, again, to bring it back to Kanye, these are not the people he needs to be around right now. And It's unfortunate because I was thinking about this. Ben, I think you and I are on exactly the same page that the solution to this problem is for him to get help and then come back and be able to say like, hey, that's the only kind of reconciliation we can get in this situation is this guy gets better, comes back and says, and by the way, I'm all in favor of, I'm not agreeing with cancel culture because what separates me from the cancel culture crowd is I think if Kanye were to come back and say, hey, you know what? I went way off the reservation. I went crazy. I said awful things. I'm sorry.
Yep.
If he came back and said that, I'd be like, all right, buddy, like you had enough social capital before this happened from creating some of the best music of our generation, according to most people and most critics. You can start making music again. You did apologize and you admitted that what you said was wrong. I fully believe in that sort of redemption arc for almost anybody.
Yep.
As long as they haven't done like a physical thing, like, killed somebody or something like that, which Kanye has not done. So, because you can take back your words, you can take back your views. And I think Kanye has that opportunity. And that's the best possible ending to what we're seeing right now. But I don't know if we're going to get the good ending. There's about 9 bad endings, and I think we're going to get one of those. And the fact, and the reason I think that is because in order for Kanye to get the good ending of the game that he's in right now, he needs people around him who are going to bring him from the brink of insanity and Jewish cabal conspiracy style insanity, which is one of the worst kinds, if you ask me.
It's really the end of the road.
Yeah. And so the thing is, we know that Kanye is divorced. We know that he probably doesn't have the best relationship with his child, or I think 2 children, considering that he has repeatedly threatened to like beat up his ex-wife's, boyfriends, and it's probably not the best relationship with your kids when that's kind of the level you're at, when you're publicly saying that you like Hitler on, nationally broadcasted internet shows. I don't know. I feel like if he had people, I know that his mother, who was probably the most important person in the world to him, died several years ago and was part of his mental decline. And I have genuine sympathy for him for that. That's terrible. But, it seems like all of the people that could bring him from the brink just aren't there. And, I don't know how. I will admit that in Kanye's defense, to some extent, I assume I'm going to go out on a limb and say that being married to Kim Kardashian probably wasn't the best experience. I don't know. We don't really talk about Kim Kardashian on the show because she's kind of neither here nor there. But I'm sure that I don't know how much she was ever going to help him. But in any case, look, I think this is going to end badly. This is going to end poorly, and I hope that somehow, some way we can get the good ending, which is that we get another beautiful, dark, twisted fantasy album out of Kanye. And and of course, the only way that can happen is if he does, go back on this and he chills out for a little while, because he may not even maybe he doesn't need therapy. Maybe he doesn't need to be on psychoactives. I understand some people don't think that's the answer, and maybe that's not. At the very least, he needs to relax. He needs to spend some time just relaxing. This guy needs to chill. He needs to stay away from Nick Fuentes. He needs to stay away from all the anti-Semitism shit on the internet and chill for a little bit. He's got $400 million still. There's a lot of chilling you can do with $400 million. There's a lot of relaxation you can do with $400 million.
There are cabins in the woods and lots of books you can buy to just chill out.
Lots of ways to there are lots of things you can do with $400 million other than like reading Mein Kampf on repeat. There's lots you can do. But in any case, I think it's a good place to leave it on the Kanye thing for now. I don't want to talk about this story too much on this show, but we'll see if we have to. Maybe we'll have to continue to do this. I don't know. If people listen to what Ben and I have said today, which is that Kanye doesn't need to keep going on these shows, hopefully we won't have to talk about it too much. I will say this to end this story. I don't think he's going to be a major factor in the 2024 presidential race.
No.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say he's not going to get more than 1% of the vote, which maybe that's 1% too many. I mean, it certainly is, but we'll see. No. I wanted to talk about one other thing today, something that is a little bit more fun, if you can call it that. There is a Biden administration official named Sam Brinton, I think. And Sam identifies as gender fluid. And you may remember Sam from about a year ago or so, because when Sam was appointed to his position as, I forget the exact name, and if I look it up, it's going to take too long.
Deputy Assistant Secretary of Spent Fuel and Waste Disposition in the Office of Nuclear Energy.
Thank you, Ben. So that sounds important. It sounds like a serious government title. And I know it has something to do with the way that like nuclear waste is stored and disposed of. And so it's an important topic. And this guy's, in an important position there. And I'm going to stop even trying to be politically correct for this story. That's not the point of this show. This dude is appointed to this position like last year, and we'll see what Susan wants to do with that. Well, Susan Wojcicki, whatever you got to do. I mean, it's kind of hard to. Anyway, this guy who says he's gender fluid and goes by they them pronouns. He does a little more than that. He if you look up a picture of him, what you'll see is that he goes for a man wearing a dress with neon lipsticks and a mustache and a bald head look. Now, whether you can see a picture of him or not right now, and maybe I'll put one up on the screen, it's not the best look. And I know that generally you're not supposed to make fun of people's appearances too much. It's just not really considered a polite thing to do. And I generally agree with that in most contexts. Mm-hmm. However, when you are interviewing someone for a job, especially a particularly important one, and they walk into the room looking this way, I'm just going to say that if I were the head of the Department of Nuclear Disposal or whatever it is, I would not give this person the job. And I don't think I would. I don't think I would consider it for very long after they walked into the room looking the way that this guy does. Now, to add on to that, I just want to make something very clear. My point in saying all this is that I actually am going to go out on a limb on the show today and say that sometimes in very specific situations, it is okay to judge people based on their physical appearance. However, I will add a major caveat, which is that this should only be the case for things that are well within their control, right? Mm. You decide whether or not you wear neon red lipstick, shave your head, have a mustache, and wear a dress at the same time. That is all well within Sam's control. I am not making fun of Sam's bone structure or the color of his skin or height or anything like that. I don't think you should get made fun of for those things. And I just want to emphasize that very strongly. But I do think that most people, and this wouldn't have been controversial until maybe the last 4 or 5 years, most people would agree that at a certain point, you can look at somebody and decide this person may not be safe to be around, let alone put in a position of power. And to add to that, I know, it goes beyond just Sam's appearance. He also gave full presentations. I forget the context, but he gave presentations on his BDSM puppy fetish play that he likes to engage in his private life. And there are photos of those presentations that you can find online if you must. And at the end of the day, all of this is to say, you would think that maybe this wasn't the smartest person to put into a position of power, because all of this information was available to the Biden administration when he was put into his position. But why am I talking about Sam today? Why am I talking about Sam today when he was appointed several months ago, and it might have even been a year ago. I can't remember. Well, he allegedly stole and is currently under investigation for allegedly stealing a $2,200 piece of luggage from a luggage carousel at an airport. Now, I say allegedly, and I'm just going to present some of the evidence against Sam here. Sam did not check luggage for this flight.
Oh, I didn't know all the stories I read, and I didn't know that.
I don't
God.
think Sam did. And that's one of the things I'm going to say allegedly, because Sam is innocent until proven guilty of stealing this luggage from this random lady at an airport. But it certainly appears like he very well may have. So it doesn't seem like a little accidental mishap. It seems like the guy saw a really nice piece of luggage and stole it, which is a pretty fucking strange thing to do and think you could get away with at an airport. And now, and Sam has been on a leave of absence for quite some time and is currently under investigation, and I think going to court over this, alleged theft of a pretty expensive thing from some lady who probably is missing a $2,200 piece of luggage right now. Now, this isn't acceptable behavior for somebody who works in the federal government. Maybe could have been avoided. And now I'll just throw it to Ben. Ben, I'm sure you're dying to get in here. But maybe we could have avoided having this person who engages in this kind of erratic, irrational, allegedly criminal behavior. Maybe we could have avoided that.
I'm sure that's possible. This is one of these ridiculous. This is like one of these clown world stories, right? That we've hired this bald guy who put on lipstick and wears dresses, and he serves some position within Department of Energy. And actually, I want to express how kind of mad I am about that, because I am a person who believes that nuclear is actually probably our future if we want to get out of the climate change debacle. And instead of taking that issue seriously, we put some trans person in there so they can make it seem like the administration is more diverse, instead of somebody who actually, I mean, this person I did see, they have credentials, like they have degrees, but
Yes.
That's not why they're there. They're there for a press release, for that little bit of bump from the woke from woke people. And I don't want to make it seem, and I think you're going to concur with me here, Scott, I don't want to seem like we're square or prudes. Like, have a fun sexual life, enjoy it. Why does it have to be a public matter? I don't publicize my particular preferences on this show. I don't think it's necessary, and I honestly don't think anybody really wants to know. But why is that not the case for people who are not heterosexual? Like, this person gave lectures about their kink. Why is that a necessary thing? Why is that a thing that we not only think is necessary, but we celebrate? And I want to bring it back to close on this comment, to a quote from Douglas Murray, who, again, one of my favorite thinkers. Everybody go buy his books. He's great. And by the way, I'll just throw as a side note, he and Matt Taibbi had the largest win in monk debate history 2 nights ago, when they were pro the mainstream media shouldn't be trusted. They absolutely slaughtered Malcolm Gladwell and a person from the New York Times that I can't remember, with the largest win in monk debate history.
You could just call her generic New York Times journalist, based on her debate performance.
But Douglas Murray, and this is a great quote, is, if there's something you shouldn't feel shame for, then you shouldn't feel pride for it either. Being gay is a morally neutral fact, neither pride nor shame, just being like everyone else. And I don't understand why we're celebrating people who insist that they need to not only take pride, but to celebrate whatever kink they have.
Yeah, I mean, I would almost take it a step further, and I want to get we're getting into the kink shaming debate online, which is an interesting debate, and and Ben, maybe you and I actually will disagree on this slightly, because I know you have more like somewhat libertarian leanings. But my thing is this: obviously, I think you should be free to do whatever you want in your sex life. I'm not talking about any kind of enforcement of what people are actually doing, but I think there's a debate to be had that kink shaming serves a purpose, especially when you're talking about certain kinks. Technically, you could say that certain things that start with a P and end with an A are a sexual desire, or perhaps even a sexual preference. And yet, obviously, it behooves us as a society to not tolerate things that start with a P and end in an A, and that I can't say on YouTube without getting banned.
Right.
So, there's got to be some limit, right? We have these limits, right? There's definitely a limit, and as people will always say, consenting adults is like, as long as it's consenting adults, and it's like, okay, that's fair. But is it also perhaps fair to, at some point, see that somebody engages in a particular fetish or kink and go, this person might not be well? Like, is it okay for us as a society to see that somebody has to, in order to get off? I mean, let's be frank here. In order to get off, you need to dress up like a dog and be in physical contact with a leather dog mask. You might not be what we would call sexually healthy. Like, and I'm not talking about being gay. Like, this goes well beyond being gay. This goes well beyond that. There's a certain point where maybe if I was interviewing someone for a job, for instance, and I found photos of them giving lectures about how much they love puppy BDSM play, I would, and by the way, the desire to share that with people makes it worse. The fact that they had the desire to talk about it publicly also makes it worse. I would think perhaps that this person isn't doing well mentally. And I know that that's not politically correct to say. That you're not supposed to kink shame people. But at a certain point, I mean, look, there are certain things where certainly most people, if people are talking about, I mean, the term for it is, without getting into the graphic details, is coprophilia. There's one thing that, generally speaking, if it's brought up in conversation, people will be like, that person's fucked up. And if you don't know what it is, be very careful not to, if you're Googling it, click on images or videos or anything like that. Just don't Google it. Just don't Google it. I'm just going to say, I'm going to give our official advice from the Veritas podcast is not to Google that term.
You can bang it. Just don't Google it.
Yeah. Be really careful, because it has to do with being turned on by caca. But, it's like, so anyway, that is something where we still have some taboos in this goddamn society where if it's brought up in conversation, people will say that person has a problem. And by the way, that's consenting adults. That meets the standard. It has nothing to do with anything that's not consensual, and it has nothing to do with children if you're interested in caca in the bedroom. But we definitely have, thank God, maintained some semblance of, having a thing where we say, hey, that's not an okay thing to do, even if it's between consenting adults. And so I guess my point in all this is saying, I think that serves an important role, because it's undeniable that if you're engaged in certain behaviors sexually, even between consenting adults, it's just a sign that you've got a blown fuse.
I don't think that we necessarily disagree. So I'm going to try to rephrase your point in a way that I think coalesces our two views. I do not disagree that there are some acts that could take place between consenting adults that would indicate to me that this person's probably not altogether well. My issue, and I think you said this as well, my issue is not necessarily those things that happen. My issue, and why, and what you mentioned, is putting it out there publicly. You know what? If I never knew about this, then I would hire the person and then probably never know about it, which is fine. But it's the fact that you're not only part of something that may be unorthodox, maybe outside the mainstream, but the fact that you're publishing it, something that is inherently a private thing. That's the judgment decision that I think actually is worthy of scorn, not necessarily whatever the underlying behavior is.
Yeah, I think it's a good standard at the bare minimum, because it points to the fact that there's a certain disconnect from reality when you think it's acceptable to share certain things with people. I mean, it's just because you've got to know that it makes them uncomfortable. And look, I guess Sam, maybe giving these lectures, was in an environment where he was, being lauded for what he was doing, but everyone in that room is disconnected from reality. Nobody wants to hear about your puppy play BDSM. In the civilized world, 90% of people don't want to hear about that. And they certainly don't want to hear about it if you're sitting together in your cubicle in the office of nuclear waste disposal or whatever.
And I'll throw on an add-on here is, I'm not necessarily even saying that, okay, there's some class on human sexuality, you want to be a part of it, you were asked, whatever. The thing is, if you want to be a public figure, if you want to be a government appointee, if you want to be a politician, sorry, there's some things you have to keep private. Like, that's just kind of part of the game. If you want to be a public figure, if you want to be a high up in the government, if you want to get elected, then you pass up that opportunity. Like, so, like, that's just kind of the way it works. Like, I'm all about freedom of speech. I want people to go out there and say whatever they want. But you know what? There are consequences at times for doing so. And holding what apparently is at least somewhat of an important position within a federal administration, maybe you have to censor yourself a little bit. And I'm not super happy about that prospect, but that's how the game's played.
Yeah. Well, and the thesis that many people, including we, had about Sam, which was that maybe there was something up with this fella, seems to have been vindicated by the fact that he just did a thing that allegedly did a thing that is just bizarre. I mean, to think that you could perhaps get away with stealing without even checking your own luggage. I mean, not even the plausible deniability, I don't think, is there that there was a mix up. I don't believe.
And even so, it's not there 2 days later when the police come talking to you.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's like it just kind of vindicates, I think, part of what we're saying. And I know we had maybe some slight deviations in how exactly we would handle this, but which is that you can judge people on certain behaviors and traits that I think we're being told you absolutely cannot judge people for. And at a certain point, it just gets ridiculous. Like the idea that you're supposed to act like it's normal for a biological man to walk into a job interview. And I don't know exactly how Sam looked when Sam had Sam's interview, but it can be assumed that perhaps he walked in with, again, at some point in the video, I'll try to put up if you're watching the video version, I'll try to put up a photo of Sam and you can judge for yourself whether or not you would hire that person. Going for, again, it's just a very disconcerting look. It's just something about somebody with a mustache, neon lipstick. Again, I'm only talking, this should not be a big deal with YouTube or whatever. I'm talking about things that are well within this person's control. I don't think this should be race, height, bone structure. Leave people alone. Don't make fun of their physical appearance when it comes to these things. I fully support that and understand that. I don't support bullying people based on things that are outside of their control. But when it's well within their control, whether it's being a man who wears a dress, puts on lipstick, shaves their head, and has a mustache, it just gets to the point where do you draw the line? And I think kind of the conclusion for today's show is you draw the line somewhere. Where is up for each person to decide, but you gotta fucking draw it somewhere, or else you might end up with an employee who is allegedly stealing people's luggage from the fucking airport carousel. And we're not even setting up any plausible deniability. Like, at least if you could do it in a smart way. And, that's just not good for your department. And, this guy's been on a leave of absence for a while. This position is basically vacant while he deals with legal issues. I think it's going to cut it for today's show. Thank you, everyone, for being with us on the Veritas Podcast. If you're on iTunes, please leave a 5-star review. If you're on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe. I will mention real quick a programming note for the viewers. If you're on YouTube, if you watch us on YouTube, you may have seen the song New Religion that I posted recently. I've been creating some music for the channel as well. We'd love for you all to check that out. And I know some of you probably already had. I saw some nice comments about that, and I appreciate all the encouragement there. A couple months ago, when I said that we were going to move to the bi-weekly schedule and I would have other content for you, that was the other content I was referring to, was the music that I want to create, which, generally speaking, at least to start, is going to have this kind of anti-woke political bent to it. You can think of it as, sort of anti-woke protest music, if you will. I plan on producing more of that content. It's something that I really enjoy and I'm excited about, and I hope you guys enjoy it too.
I've got some slam poetry up my sleeve.
Yeah, and Ben's rap album, Ben's anti-woke rap album comes out next week.
That's
right.
So
you all can get ready for the Ben Rebellis rap rebellion. But in any case,
that's pretty good.
We appreciate you all listening. I hope you enjoy that content and the future episodes of the Veritas Podcast we've got planned for you, again, every 2 weeks for the foreseeable future, all the way through this fun little election cycle we're heading into with Trump and Kanye and company. So thanks again for listening. 5 stars on iTunes if you're there. Like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. We'll see you next time on the Veritas Podcast.